make on this day 3 of the plenary. And after they give their invited critiques, we're going to ask you to do your own critiques. We're going to make little circles of the chairs, and you're going to be engaged and working for 20 to 25 minutes, where we're going to ask you to look at your favorite bit of the attribute list and then poke holes in it and let us know what you think, okay? And then we have reports back, and then we talk briefly about next steps, and then we go on to whatever's next of our day. I did push the button again. No, the button's not going to work.
No, it's focus on the PowerPoint.
Try again.
Yeah, it looked like it was.
Try again.
Oh, try again.
Or you're pushing it.
I'm pushing it wrong. It could be pushing it wrong.
Oh, it was a problem with the computer.
So here we have the lovely faces of the Data Repository Attribute Working Group. We have Matt, wave Matt, and he is with Taylor and Francis. We have me, who I'm with RDA Fair Sharing Working Group and Fair Sharing itself, as well as being a domain ambassador, which gives me a shiny badge that I wear with pride. And then we have Washington, who can't be with us today in person. Is he on the Zoom list, or because he also has a different time zone, so it's a little awkward. Washington Segundo, you can see him there right in the middle with his giant smiling face, lovely to see. We have Kathleen, who made it for part of the plenary, but not the whole, and she is right there in the 4th position from core. Then we have Michael. Wave Michael, and he's from Purdue and Re3 Data. I'm saying Re3 Data, is it RE3 Data? Or
Re3 Data, you
yeah,
got it.
Perfect. And then we have Kazu, wave Kazu, there we are, and from the National Informatics Institute in Japan, and we are all lovely and welcoming. We promise we won't bite. In fact, we've asked you to do that critical thought for us today. And our tab liaison, of course, Rosella, who I'm not sure if is in the audience, but who has been helping us at every step along the way. And now I'm going to pass over to Matt. Here's the magic clicker.
Thank you. Can I jump in really quick and just make sure that everybody accesses the Google Doc?
Oh, I forgot to do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go back one.
Really quick?
Michael reminded me, so it is all my fault.
No, it's okay. It's our duty as chairs.
There we are.
There's a QR code if you need access to it. It's also linked from the program from the conference website. You can take a minute and just put your name and institutional affiliation, and we'll be using that collaborative Google Doc later in the working group. I don't know if you saw the title of this, but it's a data repository working group working meeting. The working is actually in the title twice intentionally. It's a working meeting. With extra so we're gonna, yeah, exactly, extra work. So please do that now. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you didn't interrupt. You reminded me of my failure, and that's perfectly fine. That's important.
Wow.
Yeah. It's all right. So off we go, Matt.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. So yeah, this is just a few slides to give you an update on what we've been doing. And if this is the first time you're encountering our working group, letting you know about what we've been doing and kind of getting you up to speed. So you can definitely do some work, as we've all said a few times now. So this group was established in February 2022. And we've been having monthly meetings. We have been working very hard and regularly getting over 30 attendees consistently for over the last year, which has been great. A really good group of people coming together and helping us pull together the documentation that we'll be sharing and asking for feedback on today. We had our kickoff meeting virtually at P19, and that was kind of the first opportunity to share the work that we've been doing at a plenary meeting. And then this is our first in-person plenary meeting, even the first time that some of the co-chairs have met each other in real life. So that's been a great opportunity to have so many of them here at the conference today. And then we'll be looking to wrap this work up after the next plenary later in the year. In case you haven't seen the case statement for this working group, it's in tiny letters on the screen. But as a remote, so what we're trying to do here is really produce a list of common attributes that describe research data repositories, give examples of where those different attributes or features are currently expressed, and thinking about how they might best be exposed both for humans but also for machine readers. We identified that we were going to need a few different outputs of this working group over the course of our 18 months. And you can see those on the screen. But the first thing we're looking to produce is a list of common attributes of a data repository. So what are the key features or key attributes that each data repository should be exposing about itself, and then looking to provide definitions of these, rationales for why it's important. Also starting to think about the feasibility of its implementation, like how easy or difficult is it going to be for any given repository to share this information about itself, and then working on to a bit of a gap analysis from looking at our current list of attributes and doing some scanning of current data repositories. How easy or difficult is it to find that sort of information at the moment? And that's kind of leading us on to kind of future work. If we're going to be asking repositories to have a complete list of this information available, how much work is going to be required at data repositories to make these changes? And then the second part is really a selection of examples that are going to illustrate the different approaches being taken by repositories to expose these attributes to its users. So one of the activities that we did as a group in one of the early meetings, probably last summer, was to have a session really thinking about the different users that use data repositories. And we had a whole session thinking about user stories to really dig into the different stakeholders and their viewpoints and what they're looking to find. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of creating user stories, but if you're not, the idea is that you would kind of fill in the blanks around the statement that you can see on the slide. So as such a certain type of person, I would like to do such a thing in order to, and you can see the kind of screen grab from the Miro activity we did, and there were hundreds of stickies that our group put together, all taking on the views of different stakeholders and the different activities they'd like to do. I've pulled out the first 4 that I found that you can see on the slide to give you some examples. So as a researcher, I'd like to identify a repository based in my country in order to share data with my colleagues. As a repository service provider, I'd like to realize the situation that can list institutional repositories as publishers' recommended data repositories. And then one that I found as a publisher, I want to be able to help people identify repositories that facilitate private peer review in order to better advise authors. It's a question we get all the time as a publisher: where can I deposit my data that's going to allow it to be peer reviewed privately? Also, as a registry of research data repositories, how can I index relevant attributes of repositories in order to better search and raise them for users? So taking on the views of the user stories, we then started to think about the structure of the output document that we're going to need to present. And we came up with this kind of structure for the document. So every entry in our document will have the following structure. So you can see the kind of headings in bold, and then some of the examples after that. So firstly, the label or the name, the thing that we're going to be describing. So for example, the name of the repository. The next one is a description. So one of the things that we found is that lots of people often have different understandings or different interpretations of what some of these things mean. So it's really useful to have clear descriptions of each attribute in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Some of them are quite straightforward though. So a description, i.e. the name of the repository and what users commonly call it. Then we're going to lay out some examples, so to be really clear about what we're talking about. So the example we have here is the Purdue University Research Repository. And then the fourth one is the schemata. So we know that there are current schemes that have different attributes of data repositories included. So does this feature exist in any other current repository schemes? And the fourth one is a space for some notes. So some of them are are a bit more complicated, and so we need to have some space to provide more context, specific information. If there's a whole range of different options that might be answers to this sort of question, and then there's space to clarify all of that there. And the final point is the gap analysis. So in one of the more recent meetings, we divided them all up in the working group and asked different groups to go and look at some different data repositories and start to categorize, is this something that was easy to find, difficult to find, or impossible to find? So that's kind of the structure that we've been looking at, and then kind of pulling all of this information together for the first draft of our document, which has 17 different attributes at the moment. I'm not going to read through all of the different 17 repository things, attributes that we have, but you can see them all on the slides. The document first draft there is a link to it in the collaborative meeting notes and in the session proposal. So if you want to go in and look in a bit more detail, you can do that there. But mainly to explain that through the group meetings that we've been having since last summer, a lot of our meetings have been kind of identifying these different features or criteria, spending time in small groups, looking at them and filling out the key information as I just outlined for each attribute. That created a huge document, and given that we've got a whole range of different stakeholders, really nice geographical spread, the document was quite raw, and so we kind of had a few efforts to revise it and kind of standardize it across the group, the work that we've been doing. So we instigated a smaller Tiger team to kind of do a first edit down and kind of make sure that we were being consistent across the document. And then in the last couple of weeks, Michael did another quick edit that ended up taking a couple of days to really get that into the final version that we've shared with you and the critical friends ahead of the session today. So yeah, so that's where we've been up to. I guess maybe it's worth just seeing if anybody has any quick questions at this point. Yes.
So Andrew Trelaw, Australian Research Data Commons. The gap analysis, were you trying to say across the entire spread of available repositories, on average, this is very easy to find, impossible to find, whatever? Or was it for the specific repository that my group's been asked to look at, it was easy to find, difficult to find?
I think it was probably somewhere in the middle. It wasn't, we haven't looked at hundreds of repositories. It was in a small group of people, let's all go look at some repositories that we're familiar with. So it wasn't just a single repository, could we find it?
Right.
We might have been working groups of 4 or 5 and we might have each looked at 1 or 2. So it's probably on average from a few repositories, how easy was it to find?
Okay, thanks.
So we started with the straw poll methodology, where we just asked people who were sitting around the table, based on your experience. But this is something that we'd like to put some more substance to methodologically moving forward.
Sure. Okay.
If you say institution, do you then mean institution ID or institution name? Or?
So all of that stuff is in the document. Yeah, and we can kind of get into some of more of that sort of detail, I think, in a minute, if that's okay. And there was another question behind you.
Yes, I'm Alice Allen from the Astrophysics Source Code Library. I'm wondering if you went out and looked at the trusted repository sites, the ones that register data sets as, or repositories as trusted, to see how your metadata compare to theirs.
Yeah, so we know that there are a whole range of different schemes, and Quadrasil is one of the ones that we looked at. Several of the people in the group are very familiar with those sorts of rankings. So we had all of that kind of knowledge within the group, but I think when we were trying to create the descriptions, we were trying to get people to not just copy paste directly from existing and try and do something a bit more collaborative and bring things together where there might have been slightly different wording. Can we have something that is a bit more homogenized, something a bit more general that captures everything?
More meta about your meta, right?
Very good. Okay, in which case I'll hand over to Michael.
Great, thanks, Matt. So for our next part here, I'm so excited for this. Has anybody ever been to a meeting of economists before? You have? So a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to sit in. I'm a librarian, and so we kind of cut across disciplines. I sat in with a group of economists having their meeting, and the format for the meeting, and it's not uncommon, someone will get up and present a paper, and then 3 invited guests will come and basically criticize what they just said. And it's a little bit brutal. My profession in librarianship is maybe a little more friendly. But what they do is totally collegial, and it's all in the best interest of improving the work. And then after the meeting is over, everyone goes out for a beer, everyone goes out for tea, and it's just fine. And so I thought this would be a fun idea to try to bring to an RDA session like this. And so our co-chairs have invited 3 guests to come, and basically look at the work that we've done so far, which, to be clear, is not a finished product. It's very much an active document, incredibly active document, actually. So nothing is finished. Don't take anything that's up here as gospel. And if you have input or questions or things are conflicting, that's the purpose of the breakout sessions today and our continued work moving forward for the rest of our term. But we thought it would be a good time to pause and get a fresh perspective. And so for our 3 critical friends, we're calling them, I want you to keep 2 things in mind. The first thing is that they are presenting a fresh perspective, okay? So they haven't been participating in the discussions that many of us have been having now for months. And so they may present something that we've already talked about, maybe we already made a decision on, and that's totally okay. If anything, they may be saying something that validates something, or maybe it contradicts something that we previously talked about it, and we'll think about it in a new way. And that's a good thing, okay? So shields down, phasers on stun, we're all friends here, okay? The second thing is that, they're not familiar with the document. Gosh, I lost my train of thought. The second thing is just that we're interested in all the different viewpoints that they have. Again, the criticism is meant to help make the work better. And so 5 minutes each, we'd like to start with Mr. Andrew Treloar from the Australian Research Data Commons.
Thanks, Mike. So I have been working in and around the repository space for, I guess, 20 years now. And I'm also chair of a number of working groups. So let me preface, I'm sorry, can people hear me online if I stand here?
All the speakers.
Oh, okay, they're connected, that's great. So let me preface this by saying I'm very familiar with the huge amount of work that will have been done to get to this point. So if the things that I'm saying sound like they're things that you should have thought of, first of all, you may have already thought of them. And secondly, I don't want to discount the amount of work that's already gone into this thing that I've been asked to be friendly, I'm sure that's not a word, critical about. So I have some specific nitpicks and then some meta comments, and I'll see if I can fit them all into 5 minutes. Okay, so these are going to seem, it's going to seem like I'm jumping from low level to high level, but there's kind of a reason for that. So label 4, research area, reads like it's for repositories that are designed to meet a single community. So it says, we can't require the use of one vocabulary schema. It does say research disciplines accepted for data deposit, but it's not actually clear how you would code multiple disciplines. And for some of the repositories that I'm familiar with, the answer would be everything. And so how do we code that? Do you say every field of research, or there's also the challenge, particularly once you're working with repositories in different geographical domains, of which classification set to use. I, of course, think that everyone should use the Australian New Zealand Standard Research Classification Field of Research Codes, and that SRCFOR just rolls off the tongue. But I accept that not all parts of the world would agree. And so you have the challenge, and then you have the delightful challenge of, well, how do we cross-map this research domain in Frascati into this, anyway, so.
No, Frascati.
Yeah, well, it's the only one I can think of that isn't ANZ SRCFOR.
I just like it, that's all right.
Sure, so yeah, research area. Institution. So I think it's great that the document says there may be different kinds of institutions playing different roles. I think that's great. But again, the description says a single stakeholder organisation. And so it's not clear how you would code the different kinds of institutions playing the different roles if you were filling in that one. 14, data set. For reasons that I do not understand, I wrote my comments out of order, so I'm having to jump around. Description, okay. General description of the repository provided in, and this is a theme I'll come back to, human readable format. Why only human readable? Machines are, I was going to say machines are people too, that's clearly not true. Machine readable, I think, is something that we're going to have to increasingly grapple with. And I think just saying, I mean, when I see in a human readable format, I think, oh God, it's just going to be an unstructured text field. And that's going to be a nightmare for machine processing. Dataset use license. Yep, great, that seems perfectly fine, except it looks like it's assuming that within a single repository, all of the data sets are going to be covered by the same license. So this is a generic theme I'm going to come back to, which is the level at which you're doing the description. So it reads as if you're saying, for this repository, all of the data sets are covered by this license. That is almost certainly not going to be the case. So you actually need to think about, presumably you're capturing licenses at the data set level, but then how do you roll that up to the repository level if what you're trying to do is do descriptions at the repository level? Do I want to pick off another one? Oh, metadata, yeah, why not? So label 16, metadata, yep, again, great, but again, that one reads to me, no. Let me start that sentence again. The way that's described is it's described, I think you need to be clear about the purposes for which the metadata is being used. So the notes say, driver uses ability to search for data sets within the repository, so that's internal use, and help discovery services properly harvest and index metadata. But often those are going to be using different metadata sets. So you might be exposing double and core, external harvesting, but storing it internally using something completely different. And so if I'm trying to describe the repository at the repository level, how do I capture that? Okay, so that's the kind of the minor nitpicks. The meta comments that I had. So I had four meta comments that I wanted to make. One was, and these are themes that you've heard already, the challenge of, are you trying to describe a single thing or multiple things? The second meta comment is, are you trying to describe things at the repository level, in which case you're trying to glob stuff up, or are you trying to capture some of the richness of what's happening down at the dataset level? The third meta comment is this ongoing, it's not just humans that are potentially going to be using this, it's machines as well. So you need to think, maybe not for every one of those attributes, but for more than are there at the moment, how do you expose this in a machine, a standardized, standard-ish, machine-readable way? And then the final one, influenced by having been doing this for quite a while, is all of that's great. What's the system wrapper around it? Where's this stuff coming from? How is it going to be made available to people? And the one that I really want to jump up and down and scream about very briefly is, how is it going to get kept up to date? Because I've seen lots of these kinds of systems where people will fill in the form or whatever it is you're going to use at the start, and then they will make some changes in their repository practice, and they won't bother telling you, because why would they? What's the incentive for them to do that? And your information becomes progressively out of date. So I'd really encourage you to think quite hard about the entire workflow within which this thing's going to be embedded. And I'll shut up now. Thanks.
So I remembered my second comment from before, and that's that hopefully you're being provoked, and the natural response to being provoked is to want to respond. Bottle that energy for the working days. That was what I meant to say before. I'd like to welcome up Olaf Olsson from the Swedish National Data Service.
Thank you. So, happy to be here. I will try to speak more technically about the attributes. I will fill in some of the Andrews. I agree on a lot of your points, and I will actually try to focus on a few of them. So this is from the perspective of a developer and a general data nerd. So first the overview, 17 attributes, and your categorization of them, if there is defined, difficult or very difficult. I agree with this assessment as I have seen them, so no comments there. But the next step for me, as an implementer, I really need to know the data type for each attribute. That's a hard fact I have to know. So some of them are easily identified in your attribute list as text fields, URL fields, or control vocabularies. I'll come down to control vocabularies after this. But there are also identified a few objects. And objects you have to really specify what kind of schema they are. And objects also have attributes. So you have attributes in your attributes. And that's complicated stuff. And you need to be more specific on those. So control vocabularies. I was missing a few. Research subject was one of those. In European context, Ford is probably the most used one for field of research subject. And I would actually argue use a lot of them. Don't you only use the Australian or Ford or you should have to just to carpet bomb it to make it discoverable. There's not you can just add hundreds. There's no problem for machines, at least, because discoverability is important. I will never got a complete ontology mapping. So just add everything. Persistent identifiers, there's a good vocabularies that takes that listed most of them. You should use that one. No free text for the persistent identifiers used. It also says that you should use identifier as a schema attribute. That's wrong, because that's a field that actually contains a real identifier, not the type of identifier. That should be changed. Data use license, there's also a control vocabulary for it. Otherwise, I do just suggest use the canonical URL for that license, because that will cover most of it. So the problem is we have three main categories of data catalogs. The first one is catalogs where everything is the same. That could be a research institute that's just published public domain data. Then the use license will probably be the same for everything, and it's fine. Everything is more or less the same when it comes to contact and the institution, and all of those attributes make sense. But most of the catalogs actually have a broader perspective. They cover a lot of research domains. They have perhaps covered an entire university, or for SN's case, the entirety of Sweden. Then the institution list becomes hundreds, if not thousands, of institutions. And the license will be every license applied to every kind of data set we have in the catalog. So that attribute there becomes quite strange to parse. And then you have something even worse when it comes to attributes. You have the aggregated catalogs like CESTA, or even bigger ones that have millions of data sets. So you need to have some kind of recommendation how to handle those. Perhaps it needs to be another attribute that actually specifies what kind of catalog this is. If this is institutional, that everything is in one place, or if it's an aggregate catalog. That might be the 18th attribute needed, because I think it's an important distinction. So I listed the attributes, and I realized I hate colorblind people. The attributes, I think, some of them are relevant on both dataset and data catalog. So they might have to consider having strong documentation here and telling people what you should do. For example, language. Should we list every language available in all the data sets, or should I just have the main language? Or perhaps for license, I actually argue for perhaps removing it on the data catalog, because it might do more harm than good. Because it could actually tell a lie if there's only one public domain data set, and 9,000 that's locked. So my recommendations be more specific, or remove the license, and there's some kind of telling if this is aggregated or if it's a institution catalog. So the thing I want to see next from this group, and I'm willing to contribute, I want to see implementation examples. And the obvious method for doing this is DCAT, data catalog with data service attributes. And of course, schema.org, which actually makes it really, really searchable from Google. And to answer Andrew's question, I agree, it's really hard if this is a form on some web page that someone fills in and forgets about for 10 years. The contact will just be a bounce email. So I would argue, having a recommendation, this should be on a predictable URL, and it should be added in the meta header of the catalog. So it's actually updated with the software. So especially the schema.org, because that will make it discovered by Google. And perhaps we could push the search engines into making this in the data discoverability, where they have the data sets, you can also have a data catalog part. So I would like to do this. One DCAT and one schema.org with completed example. Let's actually try out if this works for each attribute. I started doing it, but I fell asleep last night. If someone wants to join on a GitHub repository, you can certainly make something happen. That's it. That's it.
Thanks a lot. And next, Jenny Larkin from the United States National Institute.
Oh, okay, thank you. First of all, I think, how do you make it go forward? Yay, right way, okay. So first of all, this is a fantastic working group. I'm so sorry I didn't know it existed. And I think what you're doing is very sorely needed. I actually really appreciate going third, because everything Olaf and Andrew said, yay, but a lot of them I really support, especially the evergreening and how do you get it to be self-sustaining. That is incredibly important. So first of all, what do you mean by data repository? It's sort of in there, it's sort of not. From my perspective, the lens I look at it is there are data repositories that accept data for submission from the community and share it again. And there are a lot of other things that are just data resources. They don't accept data for sharing, but they make it available. This is a language issue, but language has power. So I think this applies to both, but does it really? A little clarity there would be helpful, because I think it ought to apply to both. All right, and this, you already did, I didn't know that, but looking at this is like, what are your use cases? Your language is, it's nice, but it's so general, it's not grounding me. So I'm delighted to know you already did it, yay you, make it more discoverable maybe. Or maybe it is discoverable and I couldn't find it, that's me. So that one, I'm glad you've done it, but there you go. Repository identification. All right, it's really cute that your name and your URLs are how or your acronyms are how you're defining them, but no. This one I'm going to stand on. They need PIDs. And I've been spending the last couple of days running around RDA, cornering people about this. I've been trying to corner people for the last couple of years at NIH on this topic, and those conversations never go well. But repositories really need PIDs, and I don't care which ones. There are a couple good ones out there. RID on SciCrunch, they already have a lot of RIDs for a lot of existing repositories. Link into that. I think Fair Sharing is minting DOIs for repositories. Super cool, use those. There might be other ones as well. This needs to be in the standard. So there, that I sounded stern about. Okay, so, and this is sort of reflecting just from a slightly different perspective. What did you mean by institution? Is it the one or the ones running it? Is it the one or the ones that are funding it? There are a lot of different ways I could interpret this. And I was also looking at it, I was wondering, so there are people that are lumpers and splitters. If you have a list of things that 20 things long, people like me, I'm a lumper, no, I'm sorry, right? So consider, is it possible to sort of lump these things so it's more hierarchical? Can there be a technical section? Because I look at that and I'm like, well, I would like there to be a technical section. I would like there to be a section under there where you identify and link out to the unambiguous identifiers for the standards or metadata standards or formats that the repository is using. And the other thing that you didn't touch on, but based on the conversations I've been having recently, is I'm also thinking it would be super nice for a repository to be able to say what infrastructure or platform they are based on, because that has impact on their functionality, their interoperability. So maybe nobody else cares about it, but I thought that was a good idea. And the description, I hear and agree everything about, oh my God, plain text description. On the other hand, that can be really powerful because at least there's something there. There are also other resources to get that sort of information. So for example, in my realm, biological life sciences realm, the Nucleic Acid Research, it's a journal, has an annual database issue. And so the databases, they have publications that summarize their latest and greatest things, and they have associated database. So that sort of collection of information in a very standardized format is another way of getting up-to-date information. And I think that's all I had to say. That, and like I said, everything that Andrew and Olaf said.
Thanks again to Jenny, to Andrew, to Olaf, our critical friends. I hope that catches on. I kind of like the sound of that. That was super, super helpful. Thank you. So all this is being recorded. Slides will be shared out. Collaborative notes, if things occur to you, please go ahead and plug them in, and that'll all be shared out after the session. We're going to move into the interactive part of the working group, which will be breakout group based. And so my fellow co-chairs are gathering signs here. And so what we're going to do is, I think we're going to create, what do you guys think, four groups in the room?
Can we manage 5? Because we have 5 little sheets.
Sure,
Do we have 5 sheets?
We'll do 5.
There are 5 in the minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Allison, you run to a corner over here, spread out.
This corner back here?
Yep.
So you don't have to change. It doesn't have to be a role in real life, but anyone in this corner here, you can just maybe come a little closer to each other and turn the page off the
So what we're going to do is everybody, we're going to do 5 circles, okay? And then all right, so just 1 second, Allison. So I want to make sure we set up what they're actually going to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Pause for just a second.
No, it's quite all right. So 5 circles, we'll have these up here. What we would like you to do is we'd like you to look over the 17 attributes in the kind of playing the role of a particular stakeholder group. So kind of like, I am a publisher, I am a funder, I'm a librarian, I'm a repository manager, I'm an e-science service provider. And looking at the attributes, obviously you can't go through all 17 of them in 25 minutes. Pick out the ones that are interesting to your group, talk about them, and answer 2 questions. The first one is, from your perspective as that stakeholder, what's missing from the attributes that you would expect or want to see in them? And then the second question is, what's confusing on these 17 attributes from your stakeholder perspective? 2 other pieces of kind of housekeeping. When you get together in your circle, please, before you start talking, 1 person volunteer or be selected from your group to be the reporter, because we'd like to make sure that all of your comments get funneled into the Google Doc. And then be ready to report out. And then the second comment is, we would like the groups to be somewhat evenly distributed, which means that some people will have to pretend, okay? So we don't want like a huge group of librarians and a small group of funders, or et cetera. So if you're like in the other category and you can float and pick a group maybe that doesn't have as many people, that would be very much appreciated. To everybody online, we'll be putting you in 1 group together in just 2 minutes once we get the room situated. So we'll take 2 minutes now if everybody wants to go ahead and do the circles. Jared, if you can help.
I take the publishers there, so there's no in that corner. So as well.
You can
Hi, everybody. This is the chaotic part in the room where everybody pulls their chairs into circles and picks their stakeholder group and looks at the 17 attributes and looks at what is confusing or what's missing. And hopefully you can hear me. It's really loud in here. What I'm going to do right now, I think, is I'm going to put all of you into one breakout group. If you would please pick one person to report out. We'll try and report out from online also. Hopefully we have the technology to do that. And then whoever that reporter is, if you could also please put your notes into the Google Doc. It will take about 25 minutes for this discussion. And I think rather than assign you to a stakeholder group, I would say that you guys can either pick the stakeholder group that you want to represent, or maybe if you want to provide different perspectives from different stakeholder groups, that's fine. Can someone confirm in the chat that you can hear me and that this makes sense? Oh, thanks, Lindsay. Confirmed. Thank you, Meredith. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put you all in breakout groups right now. I'm also going to mute because, again, very loud in here.
Can you all move back?
This is a link to Google Docs. Okay.
Is there attributes
We knew it was
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Can you put the attributes up? Can you put the 17 up on the screen?
Yes, we could do that. I know. Well, I was going to ask a quick question. Do you guys have a reporter?
No, we're about to do that.
Okay,
What do
good,
we find
good.
missing and what do we find?
What do you find confusing?
Oh my God. Don't take me anywhere. Good job.
I mean, that's.
Well done. All right, the volunteer data reporter. I'm writing down missing and confusing.
no, so we weren't sure.
Like somebody else.
That's why somebody would be happy to, well, report back.
Round of introductions. Okay, I'll do it. I'm from the United States.
Well, I don't think it's I think
but I'm not in a funding group, so I'm a network coordinator for science.
Alice Allen, as the source of the library, I would love to have funding. So if anybody has money, I'm here to take it.
I'm worried that you don't want to watch this and it's still the students.
Said in research data commons, I'm correctly required to facilitate the other by boss.
I am struggling.
I'll find the correct DRAWG. It's a funding organisation. I'm on the spending side.
Yeah, me too.
I've run a few in my time. I would struggle to, I think many of the reasons. That's why it's also deeply increased. We know there's questions about
Let's make it a little bit smaller.
working group. Okay, so I think these are all the, yeah. So I had one thing I was noticing that was missing, and I don't know if it's been discussed, I'm assuming it probably has, and it's the trust and certification. Because it's under, yeah, so how is that covered?
Oh, yeah, I think that's under number 16.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So what I was thinking that meant is different repositories. Some are certified, some are not. Some are certified by different vendors. And information about whether or not they're certified and whether they're in process is useful. It says a lot about it.
In Fair's Fair, the project will be working on getting the information right.
So it does need to be captured again.
Yes, but it is important information.
So that's, but that is actually.
One thing does big
Yeah, I was thinking, I saw data curation, but is there also peer review? Some data publications as well? That's something, that's also something.
Oh, no, the certification, but that's also number 12, curation, I would say.
Well, curation, well, that's the thing I was thinking about, but I don't know, different, yeah.
Okay.
Data curation could also be on a very technical point of view, very valid.
So I've got something that's.
Oh, yeah.
As a funder, as a funder, I would look at that and say, this stuff is in research. Why are you asking that?
And I will tell you why, because that is an excellent question. So maybe data will do, but when I looked at this, I was, well, this would be the really nice thing if there were, like Steve.org way of implementing it, something like that that's up to date, that people could readily create some sort of harvesters to go in and readily create and curate it. This is all that they use in the area of your specific tricks. Right?
Yeah, you could afford a fast and then before they want to do one table.
That we mentioned.
Okay. Yes.
I expect them to be really clear about the interaction. Whatever system.
There we go. That happens already.
I have not realized the read-through data.
Because that I think that they were not identified some that are not there. Saying that maybe we can link for archive data are not those actually.
I would not be able to make that.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah.
That is the way to describe why things are important. I think it's very hard to find what the scope of what's the scope of stuff that's in there. Who really is the repository? Logo, and I'm like, I don't know who this is. And it's really hard to find that information. So, you know, having this document point that out, people like, oh yeah, I get what's wrong with that. It makes me look at the other repository and think, do I have the scope somewhere where you can find it?
And then you sometimes just forget to take a step back and
I was wondering, how is
They see at the SMEs fund where the research council, but they say, oh, okay,
It's the RDA.
it might be buried in the institution or something. But again, that's.
Yeah.
And new opportunities.
So, okay, so that is something. So what's the?
Well, what's the business model or owns it?
When's it possibly
Innovation, because I was wondering, preservation policy, is that about content in the repository, or is it about preservation of the service?
So that is a really, I don't know. Sorry, the preservation, I thought was referring to the preservation policy and the content within it. But what I'm hearing is a lot of interest in this model, longevity, whatever you want to call it.
If I can switch hats, as I said, okay, really there's I would care less about. I care more about consequences.
Yes, yeah, right, true.
Why should I believe that this repository
Yeah, that's a term of reference. Whatever other services.
Yeah, no, that's true. Or I can be.
Does WordPress still cover things like sustainability? And so, I mean, if you have that, then you would assume.
For those repositories that have.
Yeah, for those who don't, though, you might still. Also, the trustworthy label, and I'm sure you've already discussed this ad nauseum. But what does that mean? And what?
Yes, I agree, because it's also a slow process, maybe because the attribution might go when they're so where is still a very slow process.
Hands over time?
Yeah, how many?
Nothing to do for if we have to.
Yeah, but a lot of important are not there.
Yeah, hopefully it was feedback.
Yes, you have quite a lot,
No, is it a flash of the pan or is it a snapshot? There are a batch of different things that inform that. So part of it is the certification, but maybe certification needs to be a broader, maybe certification is part of the broader issue of, I don't like the term sustainability.
Somebody's looked at it. Fossils
I remember also question, sometimes I wonder if somebody came around and says but I think
It's a base.
Like one of the, an end of life policy, what happens if they lose their funding, that happens to the whole. So end of life policy, retention policy, how long are you going to keep it? And that, some of that may go under curation. What is the, so
So is it possible, I'm just trying to think of ways to leverage this, so that's the discussion of leveraging the RE3 for a lot of those things. I'm wondering for the core trustee, even for the repositories that haven't yet achieved the full certification or may not be in the process, is it possible that's
Yeah, I guess that's a question. What do you have as the options under certification? Like in progress?
I think the options are you ISO, are you core trustee?
Yeah, I think so. There's the type, but also there's the scope.
That's a good point.
Yeah, got it.
Can I just why?
I think it's that you have to use a certified or trusted repository, you know, those kind of things. They might matter, they might not.
And some funders support the repositories themselves, and they may or may not have expectations that the repositories they support get certification.
Yeah, it's very difficult to know, okay, as a research output. But what's the definition of this? You want some there?
What I do see is
Under recommendation.
and that could be different to certification. If a funder recommended a repository that's not certified.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so, yeah.
And I think new thing.
Perhaps the
With the funding, it is making sure that it's enough staff, that there is money for staff training. Now it is about the
Metrics.
Yeah, metrics.
It's not on there.
Metrics that you can download. There is a possibility to download, and it was metrics about.
Metrics, and metrics about the usage of these
You know, I'm under and I have to report. That I might not know, so maybe as a funder, I just want my researchers to know that they can't do that. I don't, yeah, I think it's.
I just think.
You're having parallel
Right to know that as a funder,
As a funder, I want to see how often they
Actually, as a funder, I want to know how many researchers supported by my institute that repository. Bring it up a level. Not that that's bad, it's just there are multiple different levels. As a funder, I want to know how many researchers supported by my organization.
in fact, there's an extension I would like to know
Where is it? Nice.
Complying with the mandate.
In the European Commission, we have to cite Zenodo, you can say, I can type in my funder and
Everybody, 5-minute warning, 5-minute warning. 5 minutes.
because that would be something I'd want to know. I'd want to know to go to Zenodo and say, this call or
That's interesting. Funder support. One level of funder support, funder support any given data set. But the other level of funder support of the repository itself. So too often our conversation is about data sets. And what I like about this project, conversation is about the size of data sets.
I mean, or unless it's a lot of the material repository are still. When you say that.
As a funder, I hear about.
Okay. Especially if you've got a repository that has medical, regular data. Big gap.
Oh, right, nice. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going, in fact, I'm going to Virginia next week because I'm taking the boys to see our family in Greece.
Oh, is that where you're from?
Yes, they have to. So I don't think I'm no, because so it's also I did some long day. I did it's nice going west. It's far west. Yeah, it is. And then you feel really groggy and you've got a whole day ahead of you. West and you just have a long day. Our task says, look, just make it so roughly normal bedtime. Yeah, they haven't identified. That's they got organized. And information about the funder and information about. Awesome.
I'll do it first.
Yeah, well, that is it, but sort of certified. Exactly. So, and the confusion, I think, is sort of ability issue, but confusion on the overlap between this and this and data and this and contra seal. And
Quite a few sessions I have been tried to do a breakout and they just run out of time. Like they haven't.
yes, they just.
I went to a sensitive data one and they had this whole Miro board that would do something.
You just, you were looking at the screen.
And they were like, okay, we've got 2 minutes left, so we'll tell you there's a task and maybe we'll organise another meeting and do that another time. Because, yeah, and that was going to be like half an hour.
I've been to a few where they say we're gonna have lightning talks 3 minutes, and then like each one takes 6 minutes, and then there's.
Okay.
It happens.
So I guess that's, they want to keep it.
Or did that not have a discussion at the end?
Just had like a Q&A, I think they covered most of it.
Yeah, I think it was.
I think so.
No, I'm done.
I was going to say,
Yeah, that's lowest.
Wasn't time to keep your seats.
What did you do?
I just jumped up and fell. Sorry.
Well, that's the perfect way to handle it.
Honestly, that was the best.
Yeah.
Flattery, like, it's been so amazing. So engrossed, but I'm afraid of
And they've nearly had their time.
You
guys wrapping up over here?
Right.
So maybe we can say. The counter, but you want to hold it.
I know they say this is
It's about it. We're about time. Is that Olaf?
Yes.
I thought that was really.
This has been I'll tell you.
All right, everybody. Hate to cut the discussion short, but just in the interest of time.
Yes. No, you go for it. Okay, so first we're going to hear from the online people who have been having their own breakout session. Michael's going to try to microphone on the people in the same session. We'll see how that works.
He's going to hold the microphone.
Yes.
Yep. All right.
We need to tell them that they're.
Hey, everybody, are you guys ready to record out? I'm going to hold up the laptop. Hopefully it doesn't feed back.
Oh, no, he had the microphone next to it there.
Okay, if it does, feel free to.
Everybody here okay?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
All right, online group, please, go ahead. You've got a couple minutes.
Okay, there was some discussion on the metadata standard label 11. Just needing more information about the metadata lifecycle and the workflow formats associated, the differentiating between what's agnostic versus domain-specific requirement. And another side note was it needs to be a little more granular on the stakeholders under each attribute, so sub-attributes and properties of each attribute sort of extended upon. Under machine interoperability, there seems to be a need for a link directly to the API documentation. So to use or access mechanism, like a direct one. And there's need for clarity on the geolocation of the country of the service where the servers exist or where the data set was posted, as that's a requirement in some countries versus another. And so there could be maybe an addition of an identifier that helps with that information or some other mechanism to cover that area. A side note was embargo data information not touched on but needed in terms of access to deposit, maybe a host for this information. So putting that language underneath that attribute label. Another follow-up to the persistent identifiers needing more granularity, explicitly with that label, even as it exists as a term. And then another one, the research area is unclear, and I think there's been discussion about having more explicit information or a classification system to define what those research areas are. And if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free. I missed something, but that's all we have for our list right now.
That's terrific. Thank you, Lindsay. Round of applause for online.
Thank you. Great summary.
Thanks for doing that.
Should we speak first?
Yep.
On this?
Okay. Okay, I'll give that a go. So two broad areas we talked about. The first one was around the trust and certification, and that's sort of attribute 16 about certification, but also talks about curation at the data set level. And the big question there, and we didn't answer it, was, how does this work with the V3 data so that between the two things we can get out the information about the trust and certification? Does it
Well, luckily we have V3 Data and Fair Sharing as co-chairs among the other co-chairs, so I'm sure we'll work something out, won't we, Michael?
So I think it's kind of what goes in V3 data, what goes in attributes. Clear there, but we didn't answer the question. The other thing we noticed, putting funder hats on, is of course there's nothing about funding information in your attributes. And funders might want funding information in your attributes for two different reasons. If we're a funder of the repository, we'd like to be acknowledged for that, so we want to see that nice and big. And if we're a funder of the researchers who are depositing data or using the data in your repository, again, we want to know about that, and we want to know, for example, we want to see if we're recommending to our researchers that they can use the repository as one to comply with our policy, you could use this repository. We want to see that there. So we want the list of funders to have approved this repository for use. So that we can see our name there alongside the others. Again, funder potential users of the repository, we want to know the preservation policy, we want to worry about end of life, what's going to happen if the repository dies, so we don't want researchers to put a whole lot of data somewhere that's going to just disappear in a few years' time when the funding runs out, because someone else is funding the repository. We want to see you collect lots of metrics and roll them up from the data set level up to the top, so because we want to collect information about where our research has gone. So we need to be able to collect that from the repository somehow, but it's really a roll up. It's got to be a roll up of the information that's down at the dataset level, somehow rolled up, or put the tools in there so that we can roll it up. But we want to be able to collect those metrics about the use, deposit use and collection use. Yeah.
We're about there on your time. Anything else? Make sure all that's in the notes, because those are all really good points.
Thank you very much.
We have researchers.
We are the researcher, and when we start a discussion as a researcher, so we realized in looking back the working group discussion for 1 year, so we are lacking a perspective for the researcher. So we hear many pain from the researcher's point of view. So there's a voice, like, you know, at the beginning where we deposit the content to the repository, they would like to know the cost, how much cost that is take. But we, you know, try to deposit a huge amount of the data, for example, so there's no description about it in the list. And also, so this is because of the restriction from the publishers or the funders. So the researchers also need to know the timeline or which workflow are waiting after depositing the content into the repository. So some of the publisher has some, not the limitation, but some the guideline for the depositing content, or, you know, for the reviewing process or something like that way. So they would like to know some alliance between the two. And in addition to that, also not only, you know, focusing on the one specific domain, that now is the multidisciplinary the work are, you know, has been done for in many fields. So they would like to know how much this repository can be customized in terms of the metadata or the different kind of, you know, the aspect, but which is, you know, so difficult from the repository operation point of view, but the researcher would like to know about it. And also the API. There's sometimes the researcher would like to deposit content by using the API, and there's some machine actionable the description, but maybe in addition to that, the researcher would like to know some sample code or something direct to the researcher to be able to utilize the existing source code. So it was a very fresh, you know, the discussion, and this is totally different from, you know, our later the working group discussion. So Francois, do you have any additional?
I think that the feeling after the friendly comments was that maybe we have to develop the example section or to add features to the attributes like it's done in the GOG model group. Because, you know, it could help to describe things in a bit more fine-grained. What we discussed is that we cannot be totally fine-grained to the level needed by some disciplines. So, for instance, we suggest that metadata, it could be said that it could be explicit that the repository is multidisciplinary, rather than taking anything but with a topic, but the multidisciplinary aspect is kind of thing. So, I think that, for instance, it would be good to have disciplinary metadata cited as examples, because this is needed by the researchers.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you, Researcher Group.
Thank you, researcher.
We have to go quick, we're sorry, just a couple minutes each, please.
Yeah. Everything will be in the notes, we can all review it in the next time.
Sounds great. Hi, friends. So we're the librarian group, and I'm a complete imposter here, so I'm going to rely on my folks to correct me if I misspeak. So just a few things, just to stay in line with Michael's prompt here. So some of the things that came out that were unique was an attribute for the target audience of a particular repository might be helpful for librarians to filter out an appropriate place. Classification of provided services and APIs, that could be on the submission side, but also the access side. Time to deposit and then time to get a DOI, reserved and minted, resolving to came up as an issue. And then just real quickly, some other things that might have been mentioned. Some measure of stability, file formats that can be accessed, any caps on submission size or volume, knowing the item types that can be deposited, so code, data, other things, other assets. Let's see, anything else? Help me out, group. Who we forgetting?
I think the status, if a repository is active or not, like, you know, some repository may be obsolete, but then we haven't figured out like how to define it active or not. Right? Is that like the service is still there, or like the website is up there? So I think that's something maybe as a status, like.
If this metadata is going to be on the repository site itself, it might be a struggle for deprecated ones if they're just gone, but that's why registries of repositories can step in with lifecycle statuses.
Just overall, from a librarian point of view, we think it'd be very helpful to have a more granular search ability for terms of deposit and terms of access, because if we use registries like free data, that's what we would search for, and we want quick answers and not have to wade through a whole paragraph of description for terms.
Yeah. Let's thank our librarian group.
Hi, so we're the publishers group, and we had a couple of publishers, but also a very useful perspective from data repository managers and curators. So I'll try and whistle through these. First thing, in terms of what's missing, we identified the attribute of DOI or some other kind of link to the research publication. It's a straightforward one. A much bigger question that we spent a bit of time talking about was really, does the repository support peer review? And this might be covered to a certain extent in terms of access already, but kinds of questions that we were examining were, can a reviewer get anonymous access, for example, to the dataset, private access before the dataset is published? Does the reviewer, for example, have to sign up for an account, which can be a bit of a blocker to the peer review process? So as a publisher, we really need to know before we, for example, direct an author to a repository, whether the reviewer will actually be able to get access to that data. Does the repository offer curation or sort of validation services? Is the data actually under curation at that point? Is there a status that can really be captured at the same time? Other kinds of questions we got, though, the sorts of questions that authors will ask us quite a lot when they're submitting data. For example, need to know something about the costs of data storage. You know, is that something that could be clearly defined? Again, it's maybe around that sort of terms of access and use, but are there costs over a certain size? What are the upload and download sort of limits, both for machine operability and for human operability? Does it provide information on rights holders? So this is a really controversial one, which I don't have time to get into, but license is an intellectual property rights field. The requirements CC BIs to attribute to the rights holder, not necessarily the authors. Almost no repositories I've ever seen have a rights holder field, and it's very controversial about whether you can actually hold rights over data, but it is something that I think potentially that could all go wrong at some point.
You're about out of time, Greg.
Okay, sure. And then a couple of other things that were confusing we just sort of said about, for example, is there an existing community mandate or a community requirement for that repository to be used for that data set type that isn't just the publisher saying you need to do this? Like, is there an ISTC, for example, for genetic sequences?
Thank you, publishers. And everyone, all of these lovely ideas in the collaborative notes, that way they won't get lost and we'll revisit them. Repositories.
All right, we are the repository managers, and buckle up because this is going to be fast. We had a great discussion, but I'm just going to talk about what was missing from the standard. We need clarity on what institution means. Is it the person responsible? Is it the person who owns it? What is the institution? We like more information on partnerships. information on stability, funders. Let's see, clarity. And again, the clarity on roles. What does institution mean? What is, an owner, who's responsible? Having a PID for certification, because certification schema can contain a lot of these attributes already. The location, where is the location of this repository? Because that can tell you a lot. The cardinality of the attributes. Are these attributes one-to-one, or can some of these be many? Recommend using null values, because is the absence of an attribute because it doesn't apply to the particular repository, or was it something that was just overlooked?
Yep, that's good.
And I guess general discussion was, we were struggling to relate the use cases with what's actually in the list of attributes, and what is the motivation for us to do this as repository managers? Some of the answers were getting some consensus on things like scope among the repo staff, so that can be used in that way to provide some clarity. And making the information about these repositories exposed to the various search engines, so that they can be discovered in places like Google, and have that in one place on a page for the humans, but also in XML format so that it can be read by machines.
Lovely. Thank you, repository. That's been absolutely awesome, and we've kept to time. I think those are two amazing achievements. All your help and keeping to time, which leaves us with just a few minutes for Matt to talk about next steps.
Sure. So we obviously have, as Michael said, this is still only the first draft really of these attributes, and we've obviously going to have a lot of work to do to take on all the feedback that we've received today from our critical friends and from you guys in the room and online. So we've got a lot to do there. In terms of the working group, we have already agreed that we're going to be taking on a webinar to share the information about our group more widely as part of the 10th anniversary celebrations, and we are scheduled for one of the events in May, on May 3rd. And then, I think a lot of the work that we've got left to do is going to be building up towards further revisions of these outputs coming up to our deadline, which I think is in November. So the last kind of plea here is that if you found this interesting and if you found this useful, please do join the working group online. We've been really active so far. We've had monthly meetings with lots of people discussing these documents and providing all this information. And we'd love to keep up the momentum, take on all of the inputs that we've received today and really make this as useful as possible. Please do join the working group. We'll send out more information online via email and there are already monthly meetings in the diary where we'll be picking this up and kind of taking it forward from that point.
If I can add something to that comment, I try to be a faithful member of the group.
You are there,
I can tell you, it's absolutely wonderful to participate in that.
Thank you so much, Francois.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you all the online people.
Wow, that actually worked, kind of. See you guys.
I've never seen.
Yeah, no, so I read the Let's push this into the. Yeah, I hope it goes well. Thanks again for your comments. Stay engaged. As you can. It's been part of our. As you can tell,
One of the actions that I carry forward week to week is always, you know Brian? Yes.
Yeah, I'll try, I'll catch up.
Thank you for coming, Joy. Thank you for that. That was so nice.